Keanu Reeves stepped quietly into the gleaming showroom of Vortex Motors, his worn jeans and faded jacket standing out against the polished luxury cars around him. A sharp-eyed manager nearby sized him up with blatant scorn, her dismissive attitude practically dripping from every word. But what happened next would turn the entire staff upside down and spark a change no one saw coming. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping tale, drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. If you're hooked on stories like this, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we've got another unforgettable story waiting for you. Keanu Reeves pulled into the parking lot of Vortex Motors, the luxury car dealership he'd recently acquired in the bustling city of Valoris. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and he was there for one reason: to see how the place ran when no one knew the new owner was watching. He wasn't behind the wheel of some sleek, high-end ride that screamed wealth. Instead, he drove an old, beat-up SUV, its paint chipped and its engine rattling faintly as he turned it off. He stepped out, dressed in a plain black t-shirt, ripped jeans, and a scuffed leather jacket, clothes that didn't hint at his real status. This was deliberate. Keanu wanted the raw, unfiltered truth about his business, and he knew the best way to get it was to blend in as just another guy off the street. As he shut the car door, he caught the first sign of trouble. Two employees lounging near the edge of the lot glanced his way, their eyes narrowing as they took him in. One, a lanky guy with a buzz cut, nudged the other, a stocky man in a too-tight polo shirt, and muttered something under his breath. Keanu couldn't hear the words, but the smirks on their faces said enough. They didn't think he belonged here. He adjusted his jacket and started walking toward the entrance, his steps slow and casual, but the tension was already building. He could feel their stares following him, sharp and judgmental, like he'd wandered into a place he had no business being. The glass doors of Vortex Motors loomed ahead, and as he approached, he saw more employees inside. 3 of them clustered near the front desk, chatting and laughing, their voices carried faintly through the glass, a carefree hum that stopped dead the moment he pushed the door open. The air-conditioned chill hit him first, followed by the shift in energy. Heads turned, eyes flicked over him, his faded shirt, his worn jeans, his unpolished shoes. The group at the desk exchanged quick glances, and one of them, a woman with a tight bun and a name tag reading Lila, leaned over to whisper to her coworker. Keanu caught the edge of her smirk before she hid it behind a fake cough. He kept his expression neutral, hands in his pockets, but inside he was taking notes. This was exactly why he'd come. He hadn't taken more than a few steps into the showroom when the first real test came. A woman strode toward him. Elena Voss, the manager, according to the badge pinned to her crisp blazer. She was all business. Tailored clothes, sharp features, and a clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. Her heels clicked against the floor with purpose, and her eyes locked on to him before he could even say a word. "Excuse me," she said, her voice polite but cold. "Can I help you with something?" Keanu met her gaze and gave a small, easy smile. "Just here to look around," he said, keeping it vague. Elena's lips tightened, and her eyes swept over him again, lingering on the frayed hem of his jeans. "Look around," she repeated, her tone edging into skepticism. "Are you shopping for a car?" "Something like that," Keanu replied, still calm, still playing the part. Her smile didn't budge, but it didn't reach her eyes either. "We cater to a specific clientele here," she said, her words clipped. "Most of our inventory requires pre-qualification. Maybe I can point you somewhere more suitable." Keanu raised an eyebrow, but he didn't bite back. "Not yet." "I'll manage," he said simply, gesturing toward the row of gleaming cars nearby. Elena's posture stiffened, and she clutched her clipboard a little tighter. "I'm just trying to save you some time," she pressed, her voice dropping a notch, like she was doing him a favor. "These vehicles aren't for everyone." Before he could respond, another voice cut in from the side. "Hey, Elena, you got a live one?" It was the lanky guy from the parking lot, now leaning against a desk with a grin that didn't hide his mockery. Keanu glanced at him. Marcus, his name tag said, and then back at Elena, who didn't bother correcting her coworker. The tension in the room ticked up another notch. "I'm good," Keanu said, his tone steady but firm, locking eyes with Elena. "I know what I'm here for." She blinked, caught off guard for a split second, but recovered fast. "Suit yourself," she said, her smile turning brittle. "Just don't touch anything, unless you're serious." She turned on her heel and walked off, but not before shooting Marcus a look that said, "Keep an eye on him." Keanu stood there, hands still in his pockets, watching her go. The employee's whispers started up again, low and pointed, and Marcus didn't even try to hide his snicker this time. Keanu didn't react. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough in these first few minutes to know this wasn't going to be a quick visit. The real test was just beginning, and he was ready to push it as far as it would go. Keanu Reeves stood in the middle of Vortex Motors, hands still in his pockets, his calm demeanor unshaken despite the whispers rippling through the showroom. He'd barely had a chance to take in the rows of polished cars when Elena Voss, the manager, circled back toward him. Her heels clicked louder this time, each step a deliberate signal of authority. She stopped a few feet away, her sharp eyes narrowing as she sized him up again. The clipboard under her arm shifted slightly, like she was ready to jot down a reason to dismiss him. Her earlier politeness was gone, replaced by a cold edge that cut through the air between them. "So," Elena said, folding her arms, "you're just looking?" Her tone dripped with doubt, the word looking hanging like an accusation. "What exactly are you here for? Because I've got a busy day and I'd rather not waste it on someone who's just window shopping." Keanu met her stare, his voice steady. "I'm interested in what you've got," he said, nodding toward the cars. "Thought I'd check it out." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line and she tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she didn't care to solve. "Check it out," she echoed, her voice flat. "Right? Well, let me be straight with you. This isn't the kind of place where you just check things out. Our clients know what they want and they've got the means to back it up." She paused, her eyes flicking over his ripped jeans and faded t-shirt again. "I'm not sure you're in the right spot." Keanu didn't flinch. "You don't think I can afford anything here?" he asked, keeping his tone even, almost curious. Elena's smile was tight, more a grimace than anything friendly. "I've been doing this a long time," she said, her voice lowering as if she were letting him in on a secret. "I can tell when someone's out of their league. These cars start at 7 figures. If you're not pre-qualified, you're better off at the used lot a few blocks down. I can give you directions if you need them." The words landed like a slap, blunt and unapologetic. Keanu tilted his head slightly, letting the insult settle, but before he could respond, a snort came from behind him. He glanced over his shoulder to see Marcus, the lanky guy from the parking lot, leaning against a desk with a smirk plastered across his face. "Yeah, man," Marcus called out, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "There's a sweet little hatchback down there with your name on it. Probably got a tape deck and everything." A couple of employees nearby chuckled, their heads dipping to hide their grins. Keanu turned back to Elena, catching the faint twitch of amusement in her expression before she masked it. She didn't correct Marcus, didn't even glance his way, just kept her eyes locked on Keanu, waiting for him to back down. The air in the showroom thickened, the casual chatter from earlier replaced by a hum of anticipation. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see how this nobody in beat-up clothes would handle being put in his place. Keanu didn't give them the reaction they wanted. Instead, he took a step toward one of the cars, a sleek black coupe with sharp lines and a glossy finish. He reached out, his fingers brushing the door handle, testing the waters. The move was deliberate, a quiet challenge to Elena's authority. "Don't touch that," Elena's voice cracked through the room like a whip, sharp and loud enough to make heads snap up. She lunged forward, closing the distance between them in 2 quick strides, her clipboard nearly slipping from her grip. "I told you, these vehicles are off-limits unless you're a serious buyer. You can't just put your hands on them." Keanu pulled his hand back, slow and controlled, his eyes never leaving hers. "I was just looking," he said, his voice low but firm. "No harm done." "No harm done?" Elena snapped, her face flushing with irritation. "These cars are worth more than most people make in a decade. You don't get to just look by touching them. If you can't respect that, you need to leave." Her words echoed, drawing every eye in the showroom. Lila, the woman from the front desk, stopped mid-sentence, her pen frozen over a clipboard. Marcus straightened up, his smirk widening as he crossed his arms, clearly enjoying the show. Even the few customers browsing nearby turned to stare, their conversations fading into silence. Keanu stood his ground, unfazed by the outburst. "You're pretty quick to assume I don't belong here," he said, his tone calm but pointed. "What makes you so sure?" Elena blinked, thrown off for a moment, but she recovered fast. "I don't assume," she said, her voice icy. "I know. People who can afford these cars don't walk in looking like—" She gestured at him, letting the unspoken insult hang. "I'm trying to help you avoid embarrassment. Take the hint." Marcus piped up again, unable to resist. "Yeah, dude, she's doing you a solid. You're welcome." The snicker that followed grated on the silence, and a few more employees joined in, their laughter sharp and cutting. Keanu's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened just enough to hint at something deeper. "Helpful," he said, his voice dry. "Appreciate it." He glanced at the coupe again, then back at Elena. "So, what's your next move? Kick me out or let me keep looking?" Elena's jaw tightened, her patience fraying. "If you're not here to buy, you're wasting my time," she said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "And I don't have time to babysit someone who can't even pretend to fit in." Keanu nodded once, like he was filing that away. "Noted," he said, his calm unshaken. "But I'm not going anywhere yet." The standoff hung there, heavy and electric, with every pair of eyes and vortex motors locked on them. Elena's glare was pure steel, Marcus's grin was all teeth, and Keanu stood like a rock in the middle of it all, waiting for the next move. The tension was a live wire, and it was clear this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Keanu Reeves stood firm in the center of vortex motors, his hands still tucked casually in his pockets, facing Elena Voss's icy glare. The air between them crackled with unspoken hostility, her last jab, babysit someone who can't even pretend to fit in, still hanging like a challenge. The showroom had gone quiet, the earlier snickers fading as employees and customers alike sensed the shift. Keanu's calm hadn't wavered, but there was a new edge in his eyes, a flicker of resolve that said he wasn't here to play their game anymore. "You're so sure I don't fit in," he said, his voice low but cutting through the silence. "Let's test that. I want to talk to the owner. Can you make that happen?" Elena froze for a split second, her clipboard trembling slightly in her grip. Then she laughed, a short, brittle sound that didn't hide her irritation. "The owner?" she repeated, her tone thick with disbelief. "You think you can just waltz in here and demand to see the owner? That's not how this works." She took a step closer, her heels clicking sharply, her eyes narrowing. "They don't have time for random walk-ins, especially not someone like you." Keanu tilted his head, unfazed. "Someone like me," he echoed, letting the words linger. "You keep saying that. I'm curious, why don't you call them and find out if they'll see me?" Elena's face tightened, her patience snapping like a brittle thread. "Listen," she said, her voice rising, sharp and commanding. "I've been more than polite. The owner doesn't drop everything for some guy who can't even name a model we sell. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling security to escort you out." She jabbed a finger toward the door, her stance rigid, daring him to push her further. The threat landed hard, and the room held its breath. Lila, still hovering near the front desk, shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between Elena and Keanu. Marcus, leaning against a desk with his arms crossed, let out a low whistle, his smirk growing. "Told you, man," he called out. "You're done here." Keanu didn't budge. He met Elena's glare head-on, his voice steady as steel. "Go ahead and call security," he said. "But before you do, I'll make it easy for you. I'll call the owner myself." He pulled his phone from his pocket, slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. Elena's confidence faltered, her brow furrowing. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice cracking with a mix of anger and unease. "You don't have their number. Stop bluffing." Keanu didn't answer. He scrolled through his contacts, found the name he was looking for, and hit call. The faint ringtone buzzed through the speaker as he lifted the phone to his ear. "Tobias," he said when the line picked up, his tone casual but firm. "It's me. I'm at Vortex Motors. Got a little situation here. Can you swing by?" He paused, listening, then added, "Yeah, everything's fine, just a misunderstanding. See you soon." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, turning to Elena with a small, unreadable smile. "He'll be here shortly." Elena stared at him, her mouth parting slightly, her clipboard now clutched like a shield against her chest. Who did you just call?" she stammered, her earlier bravado crumbling. "Tobias Grant," Keanu said simply. "Regional director. He'll sort this out." The name hit like a shock wave. Elena's eyes widened and she took a half step back, her mind racing to catch up. Tobias Grant wasn't just some mid-level manager. He oversaw half a dozen dealerships, including Vortex Motors, and reported directly to the owner. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, her certainty replaced by a flicker of panic. She tried to regroup, forcing her voice steady. "You're lying," she said, though it sounded more like a plea than a statement. "There's no way you know Tobias Grant. This is ridiculous." Keanu shrugged, his calm infuriating her further. "Guess we'll see," he said, leaning slightly against the black coupe he'd touched earlier, daring her to snap again. Before Elena could fire back, Marcus jumped in, his voice cutting through the tension. "Oh, come on," he said, loud enough to draw every eye. "This guy's full of it. He's probably some con artist pulling a scam. Bet he found Tobias's name online or something." He turned to Leela and another employee nearby, his grin wide and mocking. "What do you think? Should we start taking bets on how fast security hauls him out?" Lila hesitated, glancing at Keanu, but the other guy, a burly salesman named Jake, nodded eagerly. "I give it 5 minutes," Jake said, chuckling. "He's got the look, talks big, but he's nobody." The rumors spread like wildfire. Whispers bounced between the staff, each one feeding off Marcus's bait. "He's a fraud," someone muttered. "Probably here to steal something," another added. The customers browsing nearby picked up on it too, their heads turning, their murmurs joining the mix. The showroom, once a place of polished professionalism, now buzzed with suspicion and scorn, all aimed at the man in the faded jacket standing calmly in the middle of it. Elena seized the moment, her confidence creeping back. "See?" she said, gesturing toward the growing chatter. "I'm not the only one who thinks you're out of line. You've got no business here. Leave, or I'm done asking nicely." She reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen, ready to dial security and end this. Keanu watched her, then glanced at Marcus, who was still grinning like he'd won something. "You sure about that?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that made the room pause. "'Cause once Tobias gets here, this gets a lot harder to walk back." Anna's hand froze, her eyes locked on his. For the first time, doubt crept into her expression. Real doubt, not just annoyance. Marcus's smirk faltered, and the whispers died down, replaced by an uneasy silence. The clock was ticking, and every second tightened the knot of tension in Vortex Motors. Keanu stood there, unflinching, letting the pressure build, knowing the truth was about to crash through the door. The silence in Vortex Motors stretched taut, every eye fixed on Keanu Reeves, as he leaned against the black coupe, his calm a stark contrast to the storm brewing around him. Elena Voss stood rigid, her phone still in hand, her threat to call security hanging unfulfilled. Marcus's smug grin had started to crack, and the whispers among the staff had morphed into a nervous hum. Then the glass doors swung open, and Tobias Grant stepped inside. His navy suit was crisp, his stride confident, and his warm smile cut through the tension like a blade. He scanned the room, zeroed in on Keanu, and made a beeline for him. "Mr. Reeves!" Tobias called out, his voice ringing clear across the showroom as he extended a hand. "Good to see you, sir. Sorry I couldn't get here sooner." Keanu straightened, returning the handshake with a firm grip and a faint nod. "No problem, Tobias," he said, his tone steady. "Glad you're here now." The words hit like a thunderclap. Elena's clipboard slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor, her face draining of color. "Mr. Reeves?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper, disbelief twisting her features. Marcus jolted upright, his smirk vanishing as if someone had yanked it off his face. The rest of the staff froze, their whispers dying mid-sentence, replaced by a collective gasp that sucked the air out of the room. Tobias turned to Elena, his smile fading into a stern line. "Elena," he said, his tone clipped, "I assume you've met Mr. Reeves already. You do realize he's the new owner of Vortex Motors, don't you? Elena's mouth opened, then closed, her eyes darting between Tobias and Keanu like she was trapped in a nightmare. The owner, she stammered, her voice trembling. I didn't know. You thought I was nobody, Keanu finished for her, stepping forward, his voice calm but laced with an edge that made the room shrink. You judged me the second I walked in, my clothes, my car, my place. You didn't even ask who I was. Marcus, now visibly sweating, stumbled forward, his hands raised in a frantic gesture. Hey man, Mr. Reeves, sir, I didn't mean anything by it, he blurted, his earlier bravado replaced by panic. I was just messing around, no harm meant. I'm sorry, really sorry. His words tripped over each other, his eyes wide as he looked to Tobias for rescue. Tobias didn't even glance his way, his focus locked on Elena. Elena clutched her arms, her composure crumbling. I didn't mean to offend you, she said, her voice rising in desperation. It's not personal. It's the job. We're under pressure to hit quotas, filter out time wasters. I was just following protocol. Keanu tilted his head, his gaze piercing. Protocol? He repeated, his tone deceptively soft. Is it protocol to assume someone can't buy a car because they don't look the part? To tell them they don't belong here? That's not pressure, Elena. That's prejudice. Her face flushed and she shook her head, grasping for a lifeline. It's not like that. I've got a team to manage, numbers to meet. I can't coddle every person who walks in. Before Keanu could respond, Lila stepped forward from the front desk, her voice shaky but firm. She's right, Mr. Reeves, she said, her hands twisting nervously. We're trained to spot serious buyers. It's not fair, but it's how we keep things running. Elena's just doing what she's told. The room erupted into chaos. Jake, the burly salesman, scoffed loudly. Oh, come on, Lila, don't defend her. She was way out of line. Another employee, a wiry guy near the back, chimed in. Yeah, she didn't have to be such a jerk about it. The staff split, voices clashing as accusations flew, some siding with Lila, others turning on Elena, the tension boiling over into a full-blown argument. Marcus shrank back, muttering apologies to no one in particular, while Elena stood frozen, caught in the crossfire. Keanu raised a hand, and the noise died instantly, every eye snapping to him. Enough, he said, his voice quiet but commanding, slicing through the uproar. He stepped into the center of the room, his presence pulling the chaos into focus. I didn't come here to watch you fight each other. I came to see how this place runs, and what I've seen is a mess. You're all part of it. He paused, letting that sink in, then dropped the bomb. If this doesn't change, starting now, someone's getting fired, maybe more than one. I don't care who's been here longest or who's got the best excuses. This stops today. The threat landed like a sledgehammer. Elena's breath hitched, her eyes widening in horror. Marcus let out a choke sound, his hands dropping to his sides. Lila's face paled, her defensive Elena now a weight around her neck. Jake and the others exchanged panicked glances, the bravado gone, replaced by raw fear. Even Tobias shifted uncomfortably, his stern expression softening into something closer to concern. Who would you fire? Elena asked, her voice barely audible, her hands trembling. Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on each of them. Elena's desperation, Marcus's regret, Lila's uncertainty, the others' unease. That depends, he said finally, his tone measured, on whether you're willing to own this and fix it. I'm not here to play games. You've got one shot to prove this place can be better than what I walked into. The silence that followed was suffocating, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone. Elena's shoulders slumped, her clipboard forgotten on the floor. Marcus stared at his shoes, his earlier swagger a distant memory. Lila bit her lip, her eyes darting to Elena, then away. The staff stood like statues, the threat of losing their jobs a cold reality they couldn't ignore. Keanu watched them, his expression unreadable, waiting for the fallout to settle, knowing the next move would decide everything. Keanu Reeves stood at the head of the conference room in Vortex Motors, the staff seated around a long glass table, their faces a mix of dread and uncertainty. The air was thick with the aftermath of his earlier threat. Someone could lose their job, and Elena Voss, Marcus Lila, and the others watched him, waiting for the axe to fall. Tobias Grant lingered near the door, arms crossed, his expression neutral. Keanu cleared his throat, his voice calm but firm, pulling every eye to him. "I've seen enough today to know this place needs work," he began, his gaze sweeping the room. "But I'm not firing anyone. Not yet. Instead, we're starting over. Every one of you is getting retrained top to bottom on respect and fairness, no exceptions. This isn't about quotas or filtering customers, it's about treating people like they matter, no matter who they are or what they look like." He paused, letting the words settle. "That's the standard now. If you can't meet it, you won't stay." A ripple of relief passed through the group. Shoulders relaxed, breaths were released, but it was short-lived. Keanu leaned forward, hands on the table, and dropped the twist. "One more thing," he said, his tone shifting to something quieter, more deliberate. "I've recorded everything today. Hidden camera, start to finish. It's not for punishment, it's for training. You'll watch it, all of you, and see what I saw. That's how we learn from this." Elena's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. The room went still, the revelation sinking in. Then she broke. Tears welled up, spilling over as her hands covered her face. I didn't know," she choked out, her voice raw. "I messed up so bad, Mr. Reeves. I'm sorry." The sobs shook her, but she straightened, wiping her eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, I swear." Keanu nodded, his expression softening just enough. "I believe you," he said. "But it's not just words. Show me." He turned to the group. "That goes for all of you. This is your chance. Take it." The meeting ended and the staff filed out, subdued but determined. Keanu stayed back, watching them go, a flicker of hope stirring in his chest. 1 month later, Vortex Motors was unrecognizable. Word had spread about Keanu's visit, but the real story was the change. Customers, young, old, dressed up or down, walked in and were met with genuine warmth. Elena led the shift, her old sharpness replaced by a quiet resolve. She greeted a young guy in a hoodie one day, listening as he asked about a sedan, no trace of her former disdain. The retraining had worked. The video, tough as it was to watch, had hit home. Sales climbed, not from pressure, but from trust. Keanu stopped by, unannounced, standing at the edge of the lot, watching Elena laugh with a customer. She caught his eye and gave a small nod, a silent promise kept. He smiled faintly, the weight of that first day gone. Vortex Motors wasn't just a dealership now, it was proof people could change, and he'd bet on that from the start. Disclaimer: this story is fictional, created for entertainment under YouTube's fair use. Any resemblance to real events or people is coincidental.